I just wanted to say that we've already done a lot in a lot of areas. We're part of two coalitions. We've been doing legal analysis. We've joined in some suits, and we have staff members who have worked, enormous amounts of hours. Julie has become a real expert on this issue. And, we definitely have some things that we want as deliverables. And I think when we get to question and answer, we can share all of that. But, we've hired consultants. We've done a lot of different things. And we're really feeling the pressure from it. But I think I'll just turn it over to Chris to lead the discussion. If anyone has anything they want to say and they don't want to have their microphone on recorded or whatever, I think we're going to mute everyone now. But when we go to the Q&A at the end, please write your questions down because we're not going to interrupt the presentation. We're trying to make it flow quick. And in Q&A, we'll have two separate Q&As. We'll have open and closed Q&A in terms of recording. So I think if anyone has anything that they want closed, maybe they could say that at the beginning of the open session, and then we'll go to closed session ultimately. But we were hoping to record this because we have people who cannot attend who are very interested. That's it. So everyone's going to get muted now. And we're actually going to turn off the chat as well, because that way people can focus on the presentation. And then we'll go straight to question and answer afterwards. Thank you, and welcome to everybody.
I'm going to share my screen just so we can have some visuals that may help us all appreciate what we're dealing with. We wanted to start out just with a restatement of the problem. Very quickly, explosive growth of data centers that threaten our clean energy future, the environment, communities, with costs being unfairly borne by existing ratepayers and taxpayers, and communities that are not benefiting from local tax revenue are often bearing the brunt of the impacts. So you have the whole series of, very serious inequities and impacts that we need to address. Whether or not you have data centers, these are impacts that we need to do a better job of addressing. We think that winning can be articulated. We think it means better planning and monitoring of the rate of change and the scale and scope of what we're dealing with. Greater transparency about specific issues. We think energy, water use, cost of infrastructure are the starting points. There are obviously a lot of other specific issues that need greater transparency. We need to understand the full impacts. We need to set standards and create, best practices for this huge industry. We need to make sure the industry is paying its fair share. And we need to be sure that as we take on this global concentration of one of the largest industries in the world, we consciously think about how we're going to help Virginia and our communities mitigate the impacts of that concentrated development. This is not an increment of what would have happened anyway. This is taking all of the world's data challenges, putting them into a very small place relative to the rest of the globe. And right now, we don't have a plan on how we're going to deal with the consequences. And so at the end of the day, this mitigation piece may be one of the more important things that comes out of it. I will just raise for you all, the experience that the United States had with the development of offshore drilling and the oil fields offshore. There were oil spills, there were real challenges and impacts. We started to regulate them, which was important. But what was equally important was the creation of the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which got royalties from those offshore developments that have paid for most of the federal share of conservation over the last 50 years. So if you think about mitigation as what share of the enormous profits that are coming from data centers should go to the mitigation of the impacts, and distributed in a reasonable way, that could be a win-win that makes a huge difference to the work we all do together. So, oops, sorry. This is a map that just shows the companies we're talking about. You may not recognize all of them, but I know you'll recognize Microsoft, Amazon. These are the companies identified by Virginia Department of Economic Development and by Dominion as being the basis for a $200 billion private investment that may require an additional $200 billion in public infrastructure to support. $400 billion is a lot of investment. It's a lot of change. And so in terms of scale and scope, we have to recognize that this is the biggest conversion of the economy and potentially of the landscape that Virginia has ever experienced. We have some idea where these data centers are located, at least the ones that have been built as of 2021. This is, again, a map from the state and Dominion. But we realized that there really wasn't a state database. And so one of the things PEC is starting to do is track that independent of the data that is mapped by the state and Dominion. CB Richard Ellis, CBRE, has analyzed the market. It's rather startling to realize that Northern Virginia is many multiples of the next largest concentration of data centers, which is actually in London. But what's I think is stunning is the comparison with Silicon Valley, which is about 2/3 of the way to the right. Northern Virginia is about 10 times the size of Silicon Valley in terms of the concentration of data centers, and that's only going to increase as we go forward. Right now, what is on the ground and operating is drawing 2.1 gigawatts, 2,100 megawatts of power. That's a lot. But what's going to happen in the future is even more, I think, intimidating. We've been tracking what's been approved and yet unbuilt, plus what's been applied for but not yet approved. And the combination is somewhere between 16 and 48,000 megawatts, 16 and 48 gigawatts. And to put that into perspective, that's somewhere around 12 million homes. And right now in the state of Virginia, there's about 3 to 3.5 million homes. So, a large increase. Viewed from the size of the energy infrastructure, it's between a doubling and a tripling of the energy system. And the vast majority of that growth is to meet the demand from data centers. We put this in, we know what data centers are, but sometimes, you have to set people's on what the standard is now. It's a building, approximately double the size of a Walmart supercenter, and it's rows and rows of computers connected to wires and cooled by some combination of air cooling and water cooling. That a building this size may only have 5 permanent employees, but it's got millions of dollars worth of computers running constantly, and the density of that electricity demand is only going to increase as we go through iterations of development on data processing and move into hyperscale data centers that are being used for artificial intelligence. The impact of these, there are multiple, but the one that has really captured our attention is a huge amount of energy, both energy off the grid and then increasingly the energy that's required for backup generation, and both of them are large. One recognition of this is almost a dated slide at this point because it's from a report that was prepared for the General Assembly in 2021 and delivered in early 2022. But what we think it confirms is that future growth in the consumption of electricity in Virginia is largely data centers, and it's the delta of the green area, the data center demand, that leads to a net growth in the system. The top bar, which is the electric vehicles, if that were the only thing that we're changing in our economy, we'd be fine. The existing system could handle it, and we could be moving to a renewables-based system that supports the electrification of everything. But data centers is causing a dramatic increase in total consumption, and I think more importantly, in peak load, which is how the system is designed. It's designed to meet the 7 coldest days, 7 warmest days, the 7 days of highest demand, plus a significant percentage of extra capacity to deal with contingencies. So, that peak load demand is the design factor. Why are we focused on this? Why is this a PEC issue? There are a couple reasons. Our region is actually experiencing a lot of the impacts directly. We've seen it upend our comprehensive plans and our planning processes. It's directly threatening 50 years of conservation work on both public and private lands, and also our work on air quality, water quality, biodiversity, historic preservation. This is a direct impact. It's threatening neighborhoods and the quality of life of residents, and that's becoming increasingly a small p political issue. And we've had a lot of people coming to us for help because they need it. The other reason is that it really does threaten the transition to a cleaner energy future. Very explicitly, as a result of the energy demand projected for data centers, Dominion Energy has issued an integrated resource plan that indicates it will delay the retirement of fossil fuel generation, increase new fossil fuel generation, and then supplement that with power, with transmission from out of state, with those transmission lines being things that are particularly of concern in the Piedmont region. All of this energy development would be funded by the ratepayers and not by not specifically by the data center industry. So a disproportionate impact on the existing rate base. And we've had confirmation of that in filings made by Dominion to explain what the rate impact of their integrated resource plan would be. It's basically a doubling of what the average ratepayers pay on a month-to-month basis. So we have a sense of what the outcome would be. So to respond to those concerns and as a result of our recognition that this was something we had to deal with, it's in our strategic plan, but as a practical matter, we've started an aggressive effort to do an information effort with the folks who live in the Piedmont, with our members, with all of our supporters, but also with the general public, and increasingly at a regional, interstate, and national scale. Run a lot of public meetings. Many of you have come to those, and thank you very much for participating. We've had large town hall meetings with over 1,000 people since November. And we've had many other meetings with smaller community groups and with impacted landowners. And one of the fascinating things about this is we've had more interest in land conservation in the last 3 months than we've had in many years from people who see where the future is headed. They want to protect themselves to the degree that they can. We've had a huge increase in media attention. What we were telling people in September and October was that we were working hard to try to get this to be understood at the statewide, national, and international level. That is happening. This is now being reported on almost every day in a new outlet. And the great thing is to see Julie quoted and to see the information that we're putting out and getting into those articles. And so the whole context for any conversations about change are now framed by the information that we've put out. And so we're very, very pleased with the direction that's headed. It's not sufficient yet, but it's certainly going in the right direction. We've launched a data center reform coalition on a statewide basis. Press conference in December that was covered in the Richmond Times-Dispatch, which was the paper of record for the General Assembly. And that was the intent. We wanted to signal that this was going to be an issue that the General Assembly needed to deal with. And we saw immediate benefits of that in that JLARC, the Joint Legislative Audit and Review Commission, passed a study bill saying we need to study the impacts. It's being overseen by a delegate from Prince William County, Jeremy McPike, and there's broad mandate to look at impacts, both the revenue impacts, the positive revenue impacts, the costs, but especially the environmental, energy, water, and impacts on historic and cultural resources. So that's progress already. And then there's been a lot of legislation introduced, and we'll talk more about that down a few slides from here. There's this ongoing effort on media. We're looking to do more. We need help. The release of the video today was we did that in-house, and we think it's a good start, but obviously this is something we hope others will pick up on and continue to expand upon. We're doing a lot of work to help folks deal with proposals for both data centers and transmission. There's over 300 data centers proposed, and there's about a dozen transmission line things we're working on now. So it's a lot to track. It's a lot to share information around, but we're doing our best to keep up. We've helped pass this through existing partnerships and coalitions, created the Virginia Data Center Reform Coalition, moved the Virginia Conservation Network and the Virginia League of Conservation Voters to prioritize this issue, and help local groups, local coalitions try to be effective in their work. And as I said earlier, we've been responding to an increased interest in conservation. One of the subgroups of folks that we're helping support are landowners and groups that are directly impacted by transmission proposals and have to prepare for how to represent themselves in the proceedings about route selection and potential eminent domain and conversion of land. That's a specialty that we have some familiarity with. We're trying to coordinate, share legal information, and develop a common strategy. And that's just one out of 6 issues that we're trying to coordinate on. Going forward, we're going to see more of these proposals. We're going to see more transmission lines surface. The ones that we've been dealing with in the last 3 months were just to respond to the existing deficit of power in Northern Virginia and the projections for the next 3 years. That whole process is restarted, and they're looking at the next 5-year period, and then there'll be another round. So we do expect to see more. And so that's going to be an ongoing, in next 3 years, I think going to be very important. Trying to change state policy and legislation to get a better oversight and regulation of the industry. We're going to have to do a lot of grass tops engagement. And this audience sort of at the point that you were talking about is like, how do we get the governor, the attorney general, our senators, existing leadership, plus the industry itself, to recognize that this has to be done together cooperatively, so that we get the benefit of the investment, but also deal with the impacts. And this last point is this idea of developing state and federal mitigation is going to be a task in itself. There's a lot of resistance to extensive mitigation on the theory that if it's good for the economy, we shouldn't have to pay for the impacts. But I think we need to change the mindset on that. As we go forward and into the future, we need to incorporate mitigation into the cost of doing business, so that we're building better communities, not tearing them down. Obviously, many of us are focused in on this because it has direct impacts on us. These are the 3 projects that got approved December 12th by PJM, which is the regional transmission organization in the mid-Atlantic and out west to Chicago. And these are the 3 projects that they said would address the existing deficit and forecasted need through 2028. There are also a set of projects that didn't go through the PJM, and those are not mapped on here because they're in various stages of discussion, but we're working to try to get them on the same map so people can see overall where the impacts are going to be. We're outreaching to the affected communities and landowners we're starting the process of evaluating the impacts as these routes get more real, and then coordinating at the regional, multi-state, and national level to try to address. This is an unprecedented amount of infrastructure all being built at once, and we're going to need help at the national and multi-state level because these are lines that have multi-state dimensions. Here's a different view of it. And, I'm just trying to give you a sense of the scale of what's happening just to serve Northern Virginia. Got a line running all the way out to the Ohio River Valley. You got a line that goes all the way up into Delaware. And what they're doing is tying into fossil fuel and nuclear plants that are underutilized and trying to bring that power into Northern Virginia. That's the part about how this affects climate and clean air policy, because a lot of those Ohio Valley sources are coal plants, and what you're doing is perpetuating and expanding their operations. That pollution all comes across the mountains into Virginia, so it's an impact we're very concerned of just in terms of our own air quality. Zooming in, this is the conserved lands that are in the path of the line that comes over sort of basically right at Harper's Ferry and through the new Sweet Run State Park along an existing right-of-way, but with a much bigger footprint. Then it drops down north through Waterford, through the Phillips Farm, down through a TNC conservation easement. It crosses over, basically just below, just above Oatlands, crossing Route 15, which is the National Scenic Byway, and then drops down south towards around Dulles and the data center alley. Down south, you can see here that it's in a block of a historic district of the Southwest Mountains, and then extends west across the city of Charlottesville, the Appalachian Trail, and the Shenandoah National Park. And zooming in a little bit, this is its proximity to Monticello. It's certainly within the viewshed of Monticello, and cuts right through the Southwest Mountains Historic District and the conserved properties along 22-231, which is also the journey through Hallowed Ground National Scenic Byway. So, when we say there's direct impacts on conservation priorities, these are good examples of that. We can zoom in and out on that, but that's to give you an overview. I mentioned earlier that there's no central system for tracking the impact, the number of data centers. We've started to do that. This is a screen capture of an interactive GIS map, and we now have over 300 of those dots on the map. We're sharing that information through the Data Center Coalition, and it's becoming, a point where people can input information and share that information together. Once we have the information in there, it's easier to start analyzing cumulative impacts, total amount of square footage, the amount of energy, the potential water use, because it's an interactive database and it'll continue to grow over time. One of the things that is most important going forward is to change policy. We need something better. Transparency around energy use, water consumption, emissions, the study and monitoring of cumulative impacts, the adjustment of the rate structure, and regulatory reform that ties tax incentives and subsidies to improved efficiency. Those bills have been introduced and have sponsors, and they're starting to move through the process. They won't all pass probably, but they are on the table. The debate's starting. And so this is a great time to start thinking about how to reach out to the folks who can have an influence on that debate. Obviously, our local officials, clearly the General Assembly, but as Adi von Guntar was sort of highlighting, the governor. The governor has a lot to say about how this goes forward. He's a strong advocate for the data center industry, but he has told many people that he's a strong advocate for conservation, and we need his help to balance these issues. The same holds for the Attorney General. The same holds for candidates for the 2025 statewide elections. They have a lot to say. The Attorney General is the advocate for the consumer at the State Corporation Commission and has the right to intervene in any of these cases to represent that public interest. The federal level, certainly Senator Kaine, Senator Warner. We've met with Senator Kaine's staff this week. Congressman Spanberger, who's actually the candidate for governor in 2025, Congressman Beyer, Connolly, Whitman. These are people we've worked with over the years, and we're setting up those meetings to give them our perspective. But as a staff, but it's also helpful for those who have relationships to feel comfortable passing on our information. All of what we're presenting today, we're going to pass on to you. There are lots of pieces we can take deeper dives on as you feel comfortable. And we hope that you will help us with these conversations. One of the first priorities is to impact the selection of 2 of the 3 judges at the State Corporation Commission. That's within the jurisdiction and prerogative of the General Assembly. It is a high priority for the Speaker and the Majority Leader of the Senate, both Democrats. The person we have the best relationship is Senator Creed Deeds, who's chairman of the committee in the Senate that will review all of the candidates and is setting the criteria for review. PEC staff, PEC lobbyists have already sat down with Senator Deeds and given him our number one concern, which is that those judges take into account existing law, which gives them the ability to evaluate the impacts on environment and the need for mitigation of those impacts when considering transmission routing and design and technology. So existing law, better interpreted, fairly adjudicated in the proceedings, would make a huge difference in terms of the outcomes of these projects. And then we need to focus our attention in the coming months and the coming years on developing a state and federal mitigation framework so that the impacts of the infrastructure we do end up deciding to build as a society, we've clarified, what impacts need to be avoided and mitigated. We've documented all the ways we can do that, and we've identified sources of funding and the way that those funds will be allocated so that it's, again, relatively transparent. You're not going to know everything, but you should be pretty open about what you're trying to accomplish. And we can all have a reasonable expectation that if we're going to bear the burden of this transformation of the communities and landscapes we care about, that frankly, the economy, the global economy that is benefiting from all these investments is helping us respond to our needs and to our challenges. So that's the overview of basically this big question. And, we were trying to figure out ways to combine clean energy, the potential conversion of land, the massive amount of transmission, and to meet that challenge in a way that leaves us better off than we are today, knowing that it could really get worse if we don't do a good job. Our staff is flat out. We're just making a short pitch here. We're doing everything we know how to do, and we're frankly, our tongues are hanging out a little bit because of the level of effort over the last 18 months. But I think we've positioned this well for ourselves and our partners and all of us working together to be successful. And our hope is that, you will join us in moving this forward, that you will take this on with us, and together that we can be successful in achieving that much more positive future than would happen otherwise. So thank you very much for your attention. I think here's where we open it up to comments and questions.
Can you hear me? I just want to add one thing. So what people need to really think about is that, for example, Loudoun County gets about $750 million in tax revenue, and the data centers renew all of their contents regularly. So even in a bad year, they're going to get a large amount of revenue over these, rolling replacements. And they were so nervous because during COVID, they had a slowing. that they set up a sinking fund to put aside 10% of their annual tax revenues from data centers so that they will put aside, something like $750 million or $1 billion so that they can always have a revenue stream like this. So it's like crack to them. And they're quite happy to approve data centers constantly. And what's incredibly unfair is that it's all of the Dominion ratepayer base that pays for it. So they get $750 million a year plus, and we get the bill to build it. And none of these companies that are receiving the data centers have to start paying until it's switched on. So, our electrical bills are going to double. And that is so that Loudoun County and soon to be Prince William County can get enormous amounts of revenue. Prince William just approved the largest single concentration of data centers on earth last week, and they want the 750 million too. So, and they got rid of the greenbelt to make sure it would happen. And, the reality is that we're going to be drowned in all of this locally, and the people who pay for it, many of them won't even be locals. And the people who benefit from it won't have to pay. So, it's a really inequitable system. And we have no information. In the EU, they just, as of January 1, went to every data center has to record its use of power, its use of water, and the emissions that its generation puts out. And we don't have any of that. We have no, real count of that whatsoever. And then they have to put in types of equipment now, newer equipment, which is conservation oriented. We don't even know what's in any of these data centers. They don't have to report on any of that. And then, basically, if we don't get delegates who are going to fight for us to change some of these things, it's going to be really challenging. I think we should know how much the tax revenue is to these localities, because it seems like some of that money should be actually being used to pay for the transmission. So anyway, I just think it's inherently unfair. And then the grid system is not well designed. It was set up in 1920, the design of it. So for example, once Loudoun approves a project, PJM is mandated as quickly as they can to provide power to it. So there's a delay right now in Ashburn because they've run out of power, but that's why they want to bring in these enormous lines. And one of the problems of bringing the lines in is that this is just the first wave. There's going to be at least 2 to 3 more waves of major power lines, and they tend to put them, if they can, along existing rights of way. But if they can't, they'll do whatever they need to do to get it here. And so, we're going to get, and we also get all the pollution that blows east from the Ohio River Valley. So, there's just a whole series of inequalities here. And the worst thing is that if someone puts in a renewable energy and they want to plug into the grid, they're told that they will probably have to pay for connectivity and for the substations, which may be in the hundreds of millions. And oh, by the way, we don't know when we can hook you up. You're in a queue. We'll get round to it sometime in the next 5 to 10 years. And businesses hate uncertainty. So, it's very hard to add power from renewables, and it's immediate hookup for people who, once the county approves it. So the whole system is broken.